In a world increasingly dominated by noise, speed, and digital confusion, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones. Those souls who never sought fame or power, but whose lives leave behind a ripple that endures for generations. One such soul was a simple girl from a forgotten corner of 19th century France, a girl named Bernadette. You might not expect it, but the words once spoken by Saint Bernadette Soubirous over a century ago are beginning to feel strangely relevant again in the year 2025. Many are quietly asking the question, were her visions meant only for her time, or were they whispers meant for ours? Born on January 7th, 1844, in the humble town of Lourdes, France, Bernadette was the eldest of 9 children. Her father, a miller by trade, struggled to keep food on the table. After losing his job, the family fell into such desperate poverty that they were forced to live in a former jail cell, cold, damp, and barely fit for human life. From a young age, Bernadette was marked by suffering. She was constantly ill, suffering from asthma, digestive problems, and other chronic health issues. Her frail condition meant she missed much of her schooling, and by her teenage years, she could barely read or write. In the eyes of the world, she was a nobody, just another poor peasant girl aching out a life in a broken economic system. She worked as a shepherdess and helped care for her younger siblings. She was quiet, unremarkable, and unnoticed. And yet, it was in that obscurity, that fragility, that God chose to move. On February 11, 1858, at the age of just 14, Bernadette went with her sister and a friend to gather firewood near a rocky grotto, known as Massabielle, beside the Gave River. As her companions crossed the stream ahead of her, Bernadette lingered near a small cave carved into the rock. Then something strange happened. She heard what she would later describe as a sudden wind, though the trees around her didn't move. And then she saw someone. Inside a small niche of the grotto stood a radiant young lady, dressed in flowing white with a blue sash, golden roses at her feet, and a rosary dangling from her hands. The figure said nothing at first. She only smiled. Bernadette, unsure and afraid, instinctively reached for her own rosary. She later described the vision simply as accuro, a word in her local dialect meaning that one. She didn't pretend to understand what she had seen. She never claimed any special knowledge. She just knew it had happened. That first appearance was only the beginning. Over the next 5 months, Bernadette would experience 18 apparitions at the grotto. Each one brought a message, not of doom or destruction, but of something deeper. A call to prayer, to repentance, to faith, a call to return to God. News of the visions spread quickly across Lourdes. People were skeptical. Some were hopeful. Many were dismissive. Dudes began to gather at the grotto each day, hoping to see something miraculous. Some believed, others mocked. The local authorities grew alarmed. Bernadette was interrogated by police. She was pressured by doctors, judged by skeptics, and questioned by priests. Her story never changed. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. She didn't embellish the details. She didn't ask for money or attention. She simply repeated what she had seen. And then something extraordinary happened. During one of the final apparitions, Bernadette asked the lady who she was. The figure looked toward her and responded with words that would shake the church. "I am the Immaculate Conception." Those words were not only surprising, they were theologically profound. The doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, which declared that Mary had been conceived without sin, had only been formally defined by the Catholic Church 4 years earlier, in 1854. Bernadette, a girl with no religious education and barely any schooling, could not have invented such a term. This was the moment that caused many to take her seriously. The Grotto became a place of pilgrimage. But Bernadette, she remained unchanged. She never sought attention. She never used the attention to her advantage. She didn't even understand why she had been chosen. And yet something else occurred, something that still draws people to Lourdes today. At the lady's request, Bernadette began to dig in the soil beneath the grotto. It was strange. She clawed at the earth with her bare hands. Mud kicked her fingers. At first, nothing happened. But then, a spring began to flow. That little spring of water would eventually become the center of one of the world's most visited pilgrimage sites, a spring that never runs dry, where thousands have reported healing, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Even now, in 2025, pilgrims still come. Some seek miracles, others seek peace, all seek God. But as all of Lourdes was transforming into a spiritual epicenter, Bernadette quietly stepped away. Despite the public fascination, Bernadette never allowed herself to be drawn into the attention. She never cashed in on the visions, never sought notoriety. Instead, she entered a convent, the Sisters of Charity in Nevers, France, where she lived the rest of her short life in service, simplicity, and silence. There, she took on the humble work of caring for the sick and poor. Her health remained weak. She endured excruciating pain from tuberculosis and other conditions, but she bore it all with patience and peace, never bitter, never complaining. When asked once why she had been chosen to receive the apparitions, Bernadette replied, "The Blessed Virgin chose me because I was the most ignorant." She meant it, not out of false humility, but from a deep awareness of God's mysterious ways. She died at the young age of 35 on April 16, 1879, but her story was only just beginning. In 1933, the Church formally recognized her sanctity. Bernadette was canonized a saint. Her body, discovered to be incorrupt decades after her death, rests today in a chapel at Nevers, where it remains a site of prayer and pilgrimage. But even more striking than the miracles surrounding her death are the quiet, almost forgotten words she spoke during life. Words that some believe are now being fulfilled in 2025. In the next chapters, we'll explore those little-known reflections, hidden fragments, glimpses of a future Bernadette may have quietly seen. What if her story wasn't just for the 19th century? What if it was meant for right now? By the time Bernadette entered the convent in Nevers, she was no longer the frightened teenager who had first knelt before a heavenly figure. She had become a woman marked by humility, silence, and suffering, but also by a steady inner light that would quietly guide her final years. Though her health continued to decline, and her body was often racked with pain, Bernadette remained spiritually awake. She lived hidden from the world, but something within her continued to observe, to reflect, and, some believed, to glimpse things that reached far beyond her time. Among the preserved records from her convent years are a handful of statements, reflections she shared not publicly, but quietly, often with fellow sisters or in letters that have been closely guarded over the decades. These are not prophecies in the dramatic, theatrical sense. They were never meant to predict headlines, but they hold a depth that has taken on due meaning as the world enters 2025. One sister remembered Bernadette saying, "There will come a time of great shaking, a moment when the world will be humbled, but grace will not be far behind." Another testimony describes her quietly reflecting, "The world will tremble, but faith will rise." Simple words, spoken without fanfare, but in today's world, marked by climate crisis, political division, and widespread spiritual confusion, they suddenly seem to carry weight. She didn't offer dates. She didn't describe disasters. Instead, she offered patterns, spiritual seasons. Moments when darkness would rise, but so would grace. Moments when humanity would be called, not to panic, but to return. To return to what? To faith, to repentance, to truth, to the God who waits, even in the chaos. In one of her most striking later reflections, Bernadette is said to have spoken of rivers rising, skies darkening, and the earth reacting with intensity. Those who heard her words at the time may have thought she was speaking in symbols, or perhaps merely expressing a sense of spiritual unease. But as we move through 2025, her words hit differently. Across the globe, the natural world is groaning. From record-breaking heat waves to floods that displace thousands. From wildfires that darken the sky to storms that destroy entire communities. It seems creation itself is crying out. Scientists warn that we are nearing the tipping point. Ecological collapse is no longer a distant theory, but a present threat. But while science provides us with the data, Bernadette's quiet voice offers the soul's question. What does it all mean? Could it be that the natural world reflects the spiritual disarray of the human heart? That just as ecosystems are collapsing, so too are our relationships, our moral foundations, and our shared sense of purpose. Bernadette didn't give us blueprints for fixing the environment, but she did offer something just as urgent, a call to reverence, a call to remember that how we treat the earth is connected to how we treat the sacred. And this, in 2025, is becoming more visible. A new movement is emerging. Quiet, but steady. People who are rediscovering not just a sense of environmental responsibility, but a deeper spiritual responsibility. They are seeing in the crisis not just danger, but invitation. Invitation to repent. Invitation to care. Invitation to reconnect with the Creator through His creation. And just as she pointed to a healing spring in the earth, Bernadette now seems to be pointing us to a healing spring in his soul. Bernadette's insight, though often overlooked, wasn't limited to the natural world. One of the most sobering parts of her later reflections concerns the state of humanity, not just the earth, but us. She spoke not of bombs or weapons, but of something far more dangerous in the long term, division, a world torn apart, not by swords, but by words. She foresaw an era where people would rise against one another not with violence, but with hostility, mistrust, and hatred. And now in 2025, those words feel painfully familiar. We live in a world saturated with conflict, cultural, political, ideological. Nations are divided. Communities are fractured. Even families are torn apart by division that seems almost impossible to bridge. Social media, once a tool of connection, has become a battlefield of opinion. Misinformation spreads like wildfire. Discourse has been replaced with outrage. And trust, in institutions, in leaders, in each other, is at an all-time low. And yet, even here, Bernadette's voice rises above the noise. Because she didn't end her reflections with warnings. She ended them with hope. She saw a time of deep trial, but also a time of grace. She believed that as people became disillusioned with the noise, something deeper would begin to stir. A longing, a return, a hunger for truth not found in headlines, but in hearts. And she spoke, mysteriously, of a figure, a childlike soul who would rise, not with political power, but with spiritual clarity, a voice to remind the world of what it had forgotten. Who is that figure? No one knows, but perhaps the point isn't the person. Perhaps the point is the possibility. The possibility that out of this brokenness, something sacred might begin again. As the world moves deeper into 2025, many are beginning to feel something stirring, not just around them, but within them. It's not just the visible crisis, the economic fragility, the social unrest, the environmental disasters. It's something quieter, something more spiritual. Across nations, people are turning inward. The global pandemic of the early 2020s forced much of the world into stillness, isolation, silence. And in that silence, something happened. People began asking questions they hadn't asked in years. Questions about meaning, purpose, and what truly matters. And now, in the aftermath of it all, something deeper is taking root. A quiet return to faith. It's not loud. It's not organized. It's not always happening in churches or movements. But it's happening in bedrooms, in hospital waiting rooms, in lone walks, in whispered prayers. It's the very thing Bernadette once envisioned. She saw that humanity wouldn't return to God through force or fear, but through longing. Not because someone told them to, but because the world would grow so loud, so fractured, so shallow, that people would go searching for something real again. And in that longing, faith would rise. This is the awakening Bernadette seemed to see. Not a political revolution, not a global campaign, but a quiet interior shift, a change of heart, a turning of the soul back toward the sacred. And as millions now begin that journey again, they walk the very same path Bernadette once walked, humble, silent and unseen, but profoundly holy. Among the most mysterious pieces of Bernadette's legacy is a vision she shared near the end of her life, spoken in hushed tones, recorded only by those closest to her. She described a childlike figure, someone who would rise during a time of spiritual famine. Not a ruler, not a prophet, not a celebrity, but someone unknown, hidden, marked by humility and spiritual clarity. This person, she said, would not change the world through force, but through reminder. A living signpost pointing the world back to truth, back to mercy, back to God. She never gave a name. She never described a place. But in 2025, with the world at a crossroads, many are now revisiting those words. Could such a person already be among us, or are we still waiting? But perhaps, as before, the identity is less important than the invitation. Because Bernadette's vision was never about one person carrying the burden of the world. It was about the possibility of spiritual renewal. Through any person willing to say yes. A childlike soul could be anyone. A mother praying alone at night. A teacher showing compassion in a broken school system. A young person standing for truth in a culture of confusion. A stranger offering kindness in a world addicted to division. The beauty of Bernadette's vision is this: God still chooses the humble. He still speaks through silence. He still works through weakness. And in 2025, when noise and pride dominate every corner of culture, her reminder couldn't be clearer. The next great movement of grace may begin not in headlines, but in hearts. Now, as we move into the heart of 2025, something else is becoming clear. This isn't just a season of crisis. It is a season of decision. For months, headlines have been filled with political unrest, economic instability, and rising tensions among world powers. From the strained relationship between the United States, China, and Russia, to widespread mistrust in national governments, many sense that something foundational is beginning to shift. Major elections loom. Global summits struggle to find consensus. People across continents are protesting for justice, for transparency, for truth. But deeper still, there's a growing hunger for something no politician or policy can offer. There's a desire for healing, for meaning, for hope. And that's where Bernadette's message becomes more than just historical. It becomes prophetic. Because while she never spoke of governments or institutions, she did speak of a time when humanity would stand at a spiritual crossroads. A time when the world would have to choose compassion or chaos, faith or fear. truth or convenience, and that time is now. For the first time in decades, even secular voices are calling 2025 a potential turning point. A year that could define the spiritual temperature of the coming era. Some are calling it a possible Great Awakening, not in the sense of massive rallies or revivals, but in something quieter and more lasting. A return to the heart of faith. And Bernadette's life, her silence, her obedience, becomes the map. She didn't resist the world's brokenness by shouting it down. She resisted it by listening to a voice deeper than the world's noise. And in 2025, that's the call being extended to all of us. As 2025 unfolds, a curious phenomenon is taking place across the world. One that feels quiet, even unnoticed by the mainstream. In the midst of chaos, there's a revival, not of grand cathedrals or stadium-sized conversions, but of something older, simpler, holier. A return to the ancient spiritual disciplines. In homes and parishes, in monasteries and online prayer groups, people are rediscovering the power of fasting, silence, simplicity, communal prayer. Practices that once seemed outdated, reserved for monks or nuns, are now being embraced by young adults, families, and seekers from every walk of life. Why? Because in an age of constant noise, people are desperate for something eternal. And this too is part of Bernadette's legacy. She never shouted. She never staged movements. She lived hidden. Yet her life rippled across centuries. Her faith wasn't loud, but it was real. Her suffering wasn't dramatic, but it was offered. And perhaps that's why she continues to draw souls even now. In a world that rewards visibility, she reminds us that depth matters more than attention. In a time that idolizes novelty, she points us back to the timeless. And in a generation that feels lost, her example shows us how to be found, not through performance, but through presence. Of course, not everyone sees Bernadette the same way. For many faithful Catholics, she is a prophetic voice, chosen by God, affirmed by the Church, and confirmed by miracles that defy science. Her incorrupt body, the spring of healing waters, the 70 medically inexplicable healings at Lourdes, all serve as signs of her divine mission. But for others, especially in the scientific or secular world, there's hesitation. They argue that visions and prophecies are often vague, emotionally charged, or retroactively interpreted. They point out that climate change, for instance, has long been predicted through hard data, not mysticism. And in some ways, they're not wrong. But here's the beauty of Bernadette's legacy. She never claimed to compete with science. Her words weren't meant to predict weather patterns or geopolitical events. They were meant to awaken hearts, to invite reflection, to stir the conscience. Her visions and reflections don't challenge the data. They complement it. Where science measures what's happening to the planet, prophecy asks, why does it matter? What does it mean? And what are we going to do with what we know? Bernadette's insights don't push away the rational mind. They appeal to the soul. And in a world increasingly divided by ideology, she offers a rare bridge between reason and revelation, between belief and mystery, between data and devotion. Whether one sees her as a prophet, a mystic, or simply a young girl of remarkable faith, her story still demands a response. Not to prove something, but to prompt something, something holy, something personal, something eternal. If there's one part of Bernadette's story that remains the most overlooked and yet the most powerful, it's this. Her life was completely hidden. After the apparitions ended, she didn't launch a ministry. She didn't write a memoir. She didn't travel the world. She joined a convent. She served the sick. She scrubbed floors. She died young, in pain, in obscurity. And yet today, millions know her name. Because God still works through the quiet ones. In an age obsessed with platforms, followers, and visibility, Bernadette is a rebuke and a reminder. That greatness in God's kingdom doesn't come from being known. It comes from being faithful. That impact isn't measured in applause. It's measured in obedience. This is her enduring power in 2025. She reminds us that the most influential lives might never trend, might never be seen, might never be celebrated by the world. But they changed the world anyway. And slowly, this hidden model of holiness is beginning to resurface. All over the world today, there are unseen saints rising. Nurses who pray quietly over patients in crowded hospitals. Teachers who live out mercy in broken classrooms. Fathers and mothers who choose love over bitterness again and again. Teenagers who choose purity in a world obsessed with pleasure. Elders who bear suffering with grace, whispering prayers for generations they'll never meet. This is the hidden revolution. This is the quiet storm of grace. And it is exactly what Bernadette lived, and what she invites us to live even now. Beneath the headlines of 2025, beneath the debates, the data, the distractions, something deeper is happening. There is a hunger, a spiritual hunger that is hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. In every country, across every language, people are asking questions that no political speech or scientific discovery can answer. Who am I, really? What is my purpose? Why do I feel so disconnected? And in this rising tide of spiritual searching, Bernadette's voice is not loud, but it is clear. She reminds us that the answers we seek are not found in external achievement or digital validation. They are found in prayer, in stillness, in the surrender of the soul to something greater than itself. In a time where everything feels fragile, from the climate to the economy to the future, her legacy teaches us that we don't need certainty to have faith. We just need honesty, humility, and a willingness to say yes to the sacred. And that's what's happening right now. People who haven't prayed in years are praying again. People burned out by religion are finding something alive in the gospel. People who were once skeptical are lighting candles, attending Mass, or kneeling before a crucifix with tears they didn't know were there. This is what Bernadette pointed toward, not a dramatic movement, but a quiet, personal return to God. Not because of fear, but because of longing. In times of trial, fear can easily take center stage. Panic spreads, anxiety rises, and people begin to see the future through a lens of dread. But Street Bernadette never operated from fear. Yes, her visions were serious. Yes, her messages called for repentance and prayer. But never once did she speak in tones of doom or condemnation. Her message was always centered in grace. She invited people to change, not because God was angry, but because he was waiting. She called for prayer, not as a punishment, but as a path back to peace. She urged people to turn from sin, not to shame them, but to set them free. And this is what makes her so relevant now. Because in 2025, we live in a culture saturated with fear, from news reports to online discourse, from climate panic to social collapse. But Bernadette reminds us that fear is not the final word. God's mercy always has the last say. She teaches us that the world can tremble and yet still experience peace, that our hearts can break and yet still hold hope, that even when we see signs of judgment, it's not the end, it's an invitation to begin again. And in a world exhausted by bad news, that is good news. There's a deep irony in Street Bernadette's story. The girl whose visions attracted crowds of tens of thousands spent most of her life in silence. She could have become a public figure. She could have traveled the world, written books, spoken on stages. Instead, she lived in obscurity. She washed floors. She nursed the dying. She prayed in hidden corners of the convent. She was never celebrated during her life. She was mocked, forgotten, and often misunderstood. And yet, the world remembers her now. Why? Because simplicity is sacred. In a time like ours, when complexity dominates everything, her life is a signpost pointing us back to what matters most. A heart that prays. A life that obeys. A soul that listens. You don't need a platform to change the world. You don't need influence to be holy. You don't need perfection to be chosen. You just need to say yes. And that's what Bernadette did, again and again. And that's what she's inviting us to do now. In a culture of noise, choose stillness. In a world of division, choose mercy. In a time of despair, choose hope. And when everything else is falling apart, choose God. As 2025 unfolds, the world is more connected than ever, but also more fragmented. And yet, amid the global uncertainty, Street Bernadette's legacy is not fading. In fact, it's spreading. Softly, steadily, almost invisibly. In South America, small communities pray the rosary daily, inspired by the apparitions of Lourdes. In Africa, pilgrims walk for miles to Marian shrines, drawing strength from Bernadette's humble faith. In Europe, once secular regions are seeing young people return to confession and Eucharistic adoration. In Asia, devout Catholics find courage in her example, standing firm in faith amid social pressure. Lourdes continues to welcome millions each year. But Bernadette's influence isn't bound to that sacred grotto. It lives in the hearts of those who have heard her story and quietly said yes to God because of it. And this is the hidden miracle of her life. She didn't just inspire devotion. She awakened courage. Courage to believe without seeing. Courage to suffer without understanding. Courage to remain faithful when everything else feels lost. In a world consumed by spectacle, she offers something different, a faithfulness that needs no audience. And perhaps that's why her story will never go out of season. One of the most challenging parts of Bernadette's legacy, and yet one of the most important, is her relationship with suffering. She knew pain. From her earliest days to her final breath, she carried physical illness, humiliation, misunderstanding, and spiritual dryness. And yet, she never became bitter. She never used her pain as an excuse to turn away from God. Instead, she offered it, not because she wanted to suffer, yet because she believed it could become holy. In our modern world, we are taught to avoid suffering at all costs. We escape it, numb it, deny it. But Bernadette shows us a different way. Suffering, when united with Christ, becomes a wellspring of grace. It purifies, it humbles, it draws us into deeper communion with the suffering Christ and with every soul that has ever groaned under the weight of this fallen world. Her silent endurance was not weakness, it was spiritual power. And in 2025, as many face mental health crises, chronic illness, anxiety, grief, and loss, her witness becomes a lifeline. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Your suffering, too, can become a prayer. And perhaps that's what makes Bernadette one of the most needed saints of our time, not because she escaped pain, but because she transfigured it. As we come to the end of this journey through the life and legacy of Saint Bernadette Soubirous, we're left with a profound realization. She didn't change the world through force or brilliance. She changed it through faith. She had no status, no education, no wealth, no influence. She had only her heart and her yes, and that yes was enough. It was enough to spark conversions, to heal the sick, to draw millions to a spring of grace in Lourdes, and to stir the soul of the Church in times of confusion. Even now, in a time when the world feels adrift, Bernadette's life whispers a truth we need to remember. God doesn't call the famous. He calls the faithful. He doesn't wait for perfect vessels. He waits for willing hearts. And that brings us back to the final mystery of her story, one she never tried to explain, but one that continues to stir hearts in 2025. In her final days, she spoke of a mysterious figure, the childlike soul who would emerge in a time of great shaking. Not a hero, not a politician, not a prophet with fanfare, but someone marked by humility and truth, a guide, a witness, a light. Some believe that figure represents a future person. Others say it could be anyone or everyone. Perhaps it's you. Perhaps it's a new generation rising quietly, one soul at a time, to carry forward the flame of faith in a world grown cold. Because Bernadette's message is not locked in the past. It's alive, it's moving, it's breathing through the hearts of those who still believe. So as this year continues to unfold, no matter what storms may come, remember her simple, unwavering truth. Even when the world trembles, grace is near. Even when the noise is deafening, God is still speaking. And even when all seems lost, it's never too late to return to Him. All He needs is someone willing to say yes, just like Bernadette did. Amen.